Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this new series of events by the Malta Humanist Association. It's a difficult time, naturally, with the pandemic, but at least we managed to still have interesting and nice events like this one today. Also, I would like to mention that if this interests you and if you'd like to engage more, let's say with the Malta Humanist Association, I encourage you to become members, to interact on our Facebook group, and to help us make the group better and bigger. And so, just to say, so I'm Jackson Levi Said, so I'm going to be moderating today. Also in the background, I'm being helped by Gero De Bono, who will be taking questions. So if you have a question or a comment, please add that to the Facebook post. And when we get towards the end, towards the last 1/3 of our time together today, that we're going to go into these questions. So please, if you have something to add, please put that in there. And yeah, so coming to our discussion today. So this is the first in a series of events that we plan to hold on a humanist exchange. And we're calling it this rather than a debate, because what we want is an exchange of ideas. We want a conversation on these pressing topics, on these topics that really affect Malta, and not just Malta, but which naturally affect Malta. Today we're talking about secularization in education for our next generation, and we're joined by two very distinguished guests here, which we're very happy to have. So first we have Professor Adrian-Mario Gellel, who, so I'm going to give a bit of a brief background on both speakers, who got his PhD from the Salesian Pontifical University in Rome, and is now head of department in early childhood and primary education in the Faculty of Education, and is also part of the Department of Pastoral Theology in the Faculty of Theology. So his main areas of research are symbol literacy, child and adolescent spirituality, religious education, and meeting individual differences in the classroom. Our other speaker, Dr. Kurt Borch, completed his PhD in Staffordshire University after a BA and an MA at the University of Malta. He's currently a lecturer in the Department of Education Studies at the University of Malta, and his main research area is the interface between ethics and politics, so thanks for being with us. So the way today is going to work is that we're going to go through a number of topics or questions, and again, we're going to have a bit of a conversation and interchange. We're going to go through these, and then at the end, we'll go to questions. So again, I encourage you as much as possible to please put in questions where possible. So I'm going to start with Adrian. So both on mute if you like. So, okay, so to kick it off, so how would you describe the current situation regarding religious education in Malta?
Okay. So first and foremost, the curricular area is religious and ethics education. Religious education in Malta is Catholic religious education, and then you have ethics education. So the area of religious and ethics education has two comparable subjects, ethics and CRE, and eventually it could evolve into having other areas, which might include, for instance, Islam, Muslim religious education. So the subject is in a perennial crisis. By crisis, I mean it is in a constant change. And this is true not just for religious education in Malta, but it's true for religious education in various parts of the world. If I were to answer to the question and add to it if I'm happy with the current situation, in very simplistic terms, I would say no, not at all. It is a far cry from what I like it to be, but I acknowledge that there's much effort from various people at various levels of the educational system. But the institutions are too slow in a rapidly changing society. However, I also acknowledge, especially when discussing with my colleagues in the Faculty of Education, that there are similar problems in other curricular subjects. So there are changes that should be made, but the institution is by far too slow.
Okay, thank you. So good, the same question. So yeah.
Yes. Well, to build on what Adrian said, as we know, in Malta at least, Catholic religious education has always been one of the compulsory subjects that students would follow in compulsory schooling, until the National Curriculum Framework of 2012 introduced or proposed the idea of having an alternative program for children whose parents decide not to make their children follow Catholic religious education. Because we have to acknowledge that the situation that we had was that in practice, children who are not following Catholic religious education were basically either having a free lesson or doing nothing or eating their lunch or walking about the schools, which of course is a very bad thing that deprives children of their educational entitlement ultimately. And then around 2014 or 2015, the ethics and education program was introduced, which is not taught from any dogmatic point of view, but which does include in the secondary curriculum some modules that talk about different world religions from a secular point of view. And the idea is that, so yes, religious education, I would say that in Malta we have the Catholic religious education, and which is taught from the point of view of the Christian faith, and religious education, or a kind of religious education, which is a partial module in the ethics program. So that's, I think, how the landscape looks like at the moment.
Okay, Adrian, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, just an issue of terminology. I'm not sure I would qualify the part in ethics as religious education. In jargon, religious education is a very specific thing. I would say that ethics per se is a form of religious education. Indeed, it is so in quite a few European countries. So you get LER in Germany or life stances in the Netherlands, and they're still considered part of the wider area of religious education.
So on par rather than in addition to?
Yeah. In some cases, some countries have decided to have a multi-faith and ethics or philosophy religious education, with the possibility of having some minority denominational religions being taught.
Okay, so let's go on to the next question. Okay, so what shape or format would you see a more secularized education system taking? How would we change the status quo at the moment to make it more secularized? And should we do this?
Shall you go first?
Sorry, Mike.
Well, I think we need to clarify what we're meaning by secular, because it's not a straightforward word at all. And there are, well, different paradigms and different models of meaning by secular. I think a non-controversial definition of secularism is the idea that any state operations and institutions as such are distinct and not determined by any faith. In the context of education, with the Catholic religious education being a compulsory subject for multiple reasons, including historical and other political and institutional reasons, that would not qualify as a secular education for that particular subject, which I guess the ethics education program is addressing in its existence. So at least the possibility exists for parents who want their children to follow, because ultimately, it's not just a matter of what the child wants to study, but also what their parents decide to choose for them. But at least the possibility exists of parents who want to give their children a secular education. And let me qualify that the ethics education program is not an education for atheist students or children of atheist parents, not at all. This is a very bad misconception. One could very well have a Christian parent, and there are a few of these, who would decide, and there are very valid reasons for doing so, to give their children the option of ethics education. So we need to go away from the idea that ethics education in Malta, as it is a rival or an antagonist to the religious education. I would agree, as Adrian mentioned, that both the Catholic religious education, despite the format and some things that we can perhaps critique about it, but surely I would agree that in various aims, including the aims of cultivating the human and the humanistic education, these are important things that we need to keep on defending. But to get back to your answer, yes, I think the closest that we have to a secular education, a purely secular education, would be in the form of the ethics program that we have now.
Okay. So, Adrian, would you say something different to this?
I would add, actually, rather than different. I'm not sure whether Kurt is implying that in the future there shouldn't be Catholic religious education.
I don't see that. Well, I'm not implying it. I'm not implying it. I think that's another matter. Because
we're talking about in state schools, right?
In state schools, yes. We talk about state schools, yes. In state schools, well, this is more of a theoretical opinion which I'm voicing. I'm not sure whether a secular state is duty bound to offer a program such as the CRE, the Catholic Religious Education, in the format that it has. I'm not saying that the state is not duty bound to offer any modality of religious education. But I don't think that in the current format, it's not duty bound. It's not a matter of saying that in principle it should not, but I don't think that it's necessarily duty bound. But I wouldn't necessarily argue that we should kind of remove the CRE as it is. I wouldn't go down that line.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, I agree with you that we need to define what we mean by secularization and secularism and whatever. And yes, I would argue that we need a system where religions and a secular model coexist. The problem at present is that the government, or powers to be, do not want this kind of discussion. And there are, at least from my very recent research, there is a frustration amongst teachers, social workers, and health workers in this aspect, creating an opposite reaction, mainly that religion is becoming a taboo. So in a secular society where, well, I would say a post-secular society rather than just a secular society, in a post-secular society where there is mutual respect and dialogue between different positions, I would argue for recognition of different worldviews, which at the moment this is not the case. So in Malta, we have at least 50 different faith traditions. And besides the Christian, there's a growing Muslim population that is not being recognized by the state, which leads us to accommodate, if need be, to different cultural and faith needs, which again, I believe that many a times we still lag behind in this area. So in practical terms, I would say, I would go as far as to say to give parents the right to withdraw from Catholic religious education and from ethics. That is a right that is given in other European countries. Very few choose it, but if we believe that, not if we believe, if we agree to the Charter of the European Human Rights and to the United Nations rights, it is the right of the child to be educated in one's own proper belief system.
So I think we're saying to treat this separate to other topics where you can't opt out from other topics, obviously.
Sorry?
I think we're saying to treat this differently to other topics, the more mainstream, like maths, sciences, and these sorts of things.
Well, there again, there are areas in the curriculum that are sensitive to certain faith traditions. Now, this is controversial and difficult, but there again, we lack a proper discussion. There are specific areas in the curriculum which are problematic to which might be problematic to a Muslim parent, not just within religious education, but within other parts of the curriculum. Now, for instance, in UK, parents have a right to withdraw not just from multi-faith religious education, but even from sections of sexual education. Again, it is controversial, but unless we start the discussion, we can't clarify the way forward. I am very much against any form of dogmatism, even in this regard.
If I may add something to this, but with that said, I think we need to be cautious about this kind of right to withdraw, in the sense that something which I like about this ethics program is that it facilitates a space for encounter, and the encounter is an important one. And of course, I'm with you with regard to the dangers of dogmatism. But if we go down the line that, well, if you don't like the subject, you can withdraw, opt out from it, and if you apply that to anything, we are basically missing out on the educational possibilities that the encounter kind of facilitates. If you've never encountered anyone, say, who comes from the LGBTIQ community, or someone who's not from your racial background or linguistic background, you will get the idea in your head that everyone in the world is like you. So I think this plurality, which I agree is a precarious and often difficult moment, I think that is part of education. And it's a part of bringing down these walls, or at least having the conversation, which they can be difficult conversations, but I think are necessary in an increasingly diverse and plural society such as ours.
Yes, no, definitely I agree with you. What I would like, however, is to start a discussion on this, because in the UK, just 4% of parents, less than 4% of parents choose to withdraw from religious education. And there have been recently quite a few European court cases on the matter, which led, if I'm not mistaken, Finland to allow withdrawal, not from the subject per se, not Finland, no. I think it's one of the Scandinavian countries now, I can't recall, where they are allowed to withdraw from parts of the curriculum. In practice, this right has been advocated or taken on by very, very, very few. But at least we should recognize the difficulties, especially for some parents. I myself wouldn't like to have this in place, but if we're speaking about a society which recognizes differences, then we also need to acknowledge how to work through our own, well, belief systems, acknowledging that we are not just individuals, but individuals within a wider community. And so the balance between personal and community rights.
So on that point, so how would you balance Kurt's point about a small minority sort of never interacting with the other?
Yes, I think, well, our curriculum at present, well, in theory, should educate for a democratic society. And the United Nations has been insisting with governments for an education in rights. In practice, this is not being done. Well, there are various means how to educate. I think the principle, especially in primary education, more than in secondary, the principle is to collaborate and dialogue with parents. Those who advocate for withdrawing from the curriculum start from a standpoint that they are antagonistic to the system or to a particular belief system. Unless the school is aware of these problems and issues and enters in dialogue with parents, kids will get a double message. So in school, they're getting a message, but at home, they will get a conflicting message. And what is happening at present, and this is what I also found in one of my researches, is that a number of kids are being brought up in two different worldviews, the worldview of the school and the worldview at home. And these conflict with each other. So by allowing parents to show that they disagree or that they want to withdraw, there can't be any dialogue and educational process with the parents. And we cannot know the extent of the problem.
So that brings me sort of to the next point. Maybe Kurt, you could come in on this. So on this point of giving different messages, what do you think about, should we expose children to world religions, for instance? Would that be beneficial?
World religions? Yeah, absolutely. This is an important point which Adrian raised on having two conflictual messages that the children will be receiving, which I think applies not only to minority faith students, but even to Maltese students.
Yes.
This applies across the board. But on a theoretical point, I also believe in the potential emancipatory role of education, in the sense that one function of education is to challenge the self, to challenge kind of beliefs that you hold, that your parents might hold, and that your community holds. Of course, this needs to be done in a way that is considerate of parents, and I agree that the dialogue with parents is an important one. But I think we should kind of jump on this rather than staying away lest we annoy anyone. I think we should take this up. And as you said, Adrian, we should get this conversation going rather than finding ways to avoid possible conflict or possible dialogue. So yes, to get back to your point, Jackson, I firmly believe that students, irrespective of their faith, should be exposed in a way that is fair on the multiple religions, right? Something which worries me is when different religions, and I'm talking about a religious education that is done from the point of view of one particular religion, which assumes that religion is in some way more true than other religions. That surely would not be a sufficient religious education, because you're not being educated on other religions. You're being indoctrinated about other religions. And I think that, yes, we need to educate about religions, not necessarily from the point of view, kind of from within the confines of that religion, but we could study religions and different religions even on an intellectual and theoretical level. At least to understand, to get to know what these people believe in, and to present those values and those principles as being legitimate ones. That just because you or your culture or your family do not particularly hold, these are values that people hold. And just because they hold them doesn't mean that they're silly or whatever. Because that is education in an important way, which makes you realize that some people do not eat or do things the way that you do, and they have very valid reasons for doing this, right? And I think that is an important education for democracy and for pluralism and respect for dialogue. But if we fear this dialogue from happening in the first place, that is a different matter, which worries me.
I perfectly agree with Kurt, and definitely that children should be exposed not just to the major world religions, but to different kind of religions. And I've been advocating this at least since publicly, at least since 2008. And yes, then I did convince the bishops, the Catholic bishops, that this was the way forward. Unfortunately, the textbooks interpreted this in a different way. Yet, I must say that the way world religions are being taught, because they are being taught in Catholic education, is not specifically from a Catholic point of view, but it is in line with the idea of learning about. So it's, let's say, an objective is if there can be any form of objective education. Learning from, so how does that religion challenge me? And learning through, that is hopefully by getting engaged in dialogue. I am critical of the content of this component in both ethics and Catholic religious education, because I believe and I fear that it is way too little, especially in a society that is becoming not just multicultural, but multi-faith.
So I think what we're saying is that major, maybe even minor world religions would be a positive thing. But I think our sticking point is the perspective from which this is coming from. So should this be from the perspective of one faith-based system or objective? I mean,
the problem is there is no objective education, and I think Kurt will agree with me, especially since, if I'm not mistaken, he studied Foucault, right? It's always taking perspectives. Now, what we need to do is to foster a dialogue. I would argue for the need, Mela, both Catholic religious education and ethics share three similar components. That is religious literacy, spirituality, and morality. They interpret them in different ways. I would argue in favor, or at least would like to see a discussion where religious literacy and spirituality are taught conjointly in ethics and Catholic education. In that way, children would not be segregated, but they would have parts of the curriculum where they meet together and where they can truly dialogue. So if I'm learning as a Catholic about Islam, I have the opportunity to discuss Islam with my classmate who is Muslim, or who can bring his family traditions into the classroom, and that would enrich the dialogue. At present, what we have is a segregation. Now, well, we could debate this more. I still believe that there is a need for some form of Catholic religious education, but I think that there are points of encounter that need to be fostered.
I agree with the idea that the segregation is not a good thing, and this is an interesting proposal which was perhaps worth looking more into. But I'd like to add a bit, because while I agree that religious education and ethics do share common concerns such as religion, literacy, and morality, I think that the ethics program goes even beyond that, and in significant and important ways. When we speak about ethics, we're not just talking about values or what must be done or was the right thing or wrong thing. Not just that, but it looks at ethics in the original sense of the term as it arose in ancient Greece, which refers to the holistic art of living and learning what it means to live a human life in its completeness, which entails, sure, spiritual dimensions, it entails religious and moral dimensions, but even political dimensions that are important. And I think the curriculum, the one in Malta, these are things that need to be defended and argued for. There is not enough space for the fostering of critical skills in this broad sense. So the pedagogy, that is the way by which the ethics program is taught, is healthy and important because it practices a free inquiry, which is respectful, which is open, and which is backed up by the robust history of philosophy. So the tool that we like to use in ethics education is philosophical. So it teaches people how to argue. And while I agree that education is never purely objective, I think that there are more or less ways of being objective about things. So the ethics program is important because it also empowers the student to contest certain things that are given to you in your culture and even in your class, and to foster an active way of being a student. We often complain that students from a very young age are schooled and not educated. That is, they're not given the adequate spaces to contest and to be affirmative and critical. So apart from the more moral dimensions of the ethics program, I think this program also responds to this need of fostering critical citizens, not only spiritual beings, but also critical citizens who also may have a spiritual dimension, however that is understood.
Okay, so 2 points. Definitely, I'm not for deontological ethics, and the Catholic religious education program, I believe, should go beyond deontology, but it should also work, and it does. To be fair, it does. It does work towards character and virtues education, which is very much akin to what the ethics program does. The problem, not just with Catholic religious education, the problem lies within the whole Maltese educational system, is that we do not allow children to be critical. It is more of a cultural thing. So we need to work more in that aspect. When I reflect on spirituality, I'm not referring to spirituality as a religious thing. I believe that spirituality is an innate dimension of all human beings, and religion is a language of the spiritual. And in this sense, both religious education and ethics, they do have two learning outcomes that insist that both programs help children to develop an inquiry with regards to fundamental human dimension and to fundamental questions, and to connect with themselves, with others, with creation, and if they believe in the ultimate being.
Yeah. But however, if I may, apart from that, which I do not disagree with, the current, at least, configuration of religious education goes beyond that. And it does teach dogma, in the sense that it teaches certain mysteries and God's plan for salvation and things like that, which go beyond free inquiry and the ability to contest and critically reflect on that. Because there would be right or wrong answers to those questions.
I disagree completely. Today we're speaking about different methodologies where maybe we're not there in Malta, or at least with some teachers in Malta, particularly in the primary. We're still lag behind. But the issue today is to question everything. And to be a good religious education should not be misunderstood as being catechesis. Catechesis is a completely different thing. In that scenario, you are part of a faith community and you work into that religion. In religious education, which is a state service, you need to grow up critically. So yes, there is the Trinity, or the dogma of Virgin Mary. Okay. Well, first and foremost, children need to learn that even in the Catholic faith, there is a hierarchy of truths. And if I do not believe in Mary's virginity, it doesn't mean that I'm not a good Catholic. It is a manner of discussing, reading the evidence, which is way different from scientific evidence, mind you, but reading the traditions and coming to one's own personal conclusions. But most importantly, understanding church traditions, the faith traditions, in order to be able to discuss and make up one's mind on different aspects.
So on that point, so with all these conflicting interests, Kurt, what do we think about what control should parents have over, given all of these valid points? What control should parents have on this education system then?
Well, at some factual level, parents have absolute control in this sense. But as a more normative point, I think that irrespective of, so let's take the example of a religious family, so religious parents who would happen to subscribe to the same religion. Now, it would make sense for them to choose the religious, assuming they're Catholic, to choose CRE for their child. However, I would see it as a very responsible and mature decision by those parents not to assume in advance the faith of the children. Now, of course, this is a bit of a difficult question because it's not a matter of waiting until the child is 18 and then making up their mind for themselves, because obviously for those 18 years of their life, they would be cultured and brought up in that faith. So it's a bit of a dilemma. But that's why I think that parents, although their children are theirs, should respect the intellectual autonomy of their children, at least on these matters, and not be too quick to impose such things. At least to leave their children open to the exploration of different faiths, because ultimately faith shouldn't be something that is simply brought, transferred from parent to child, as if culturally, but something that the children would foster and cultivate themselves.
Okay.
Yes and no. In the sense, religion is a language which you acquire. So there is the innate predisposition to communicate. And then there is the society, the community that gives you a particular language in order to be able to communicate. The same happens with religion. There is an inner disposition to be moral. Now there are scientific papers coming on this point. There are you are innately spiritual, but then you still need a language in order to access and express your moral and spiritual dimension. Now, if you indoctrinate, you would be doing harm to your child. But if you allow your child to critically engage with their own fate, and to explore other possibilities, then that is the way to go. However, in order to be able to engage with others, you need your own language. You need a language in order to learn the grammar. The grammar, so that you can engage with non-religious and religious points of view.
Sure. Well, just a slight addition. So that's why I think if parents would want to raise their children as Catholics and therefore induct them in the language game that the religion kind of provides, there are other avenues rather than compulsory schooling where that can be done. So that's why I would encourage mature and responsible parents to make use of the opportunity that schooling provides, while sending their children to catechism classes ultimately as a part of this cultural induction in the language game of their faith.
There again, where we respectfully disagree.
Yeah, sure.
Because in that way, you're saying that I'm not a responsible parent because I chose to allow my children to follow Catholic religious education. Mind you, there were times when I would say that certain things that teachers were saying were actually too dogmatic. But I think my children, well, they're still within the faith, Catholic faith community, but they themselves have questions and are able to enter in dialogue with others. And I respect their personal journey. So it is not, so again, religious education is not and should not be catechesis. Religious education is a disciplinary subject on its own, which allows children and parents to interact with religion, not from a faith perspective, at least that should not be the case, but they should be allowed to interact with their own language from a cultural perspective, from an anthropological perspective. And that is why I've always advocated that religious education should help our students to see not just what the church did good, how it contributed to society, but also the sin of a number of church members, and to question how the gospel has been interpreted over different times, and why certain aspects have been the relationship between religion and science, for instance. Anyway.
Okay, so that was a very nice discussion. So I'd like to open this up now to some questions. We had a lot of questions on Facebook, and Gail is gonna come in and let us know some of these questions. Gail?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes? Perfect.
Hi, thanks for the very interesting discussion so far. So I have a few comments and a few questions, okay? I'm going to read everybody's out so that you can reflect on them and then maybe you can comment later. So the first comment we got was from Roger Terrazona, who said, ethics education acknowledges different worldviews, starting from the religions of students taking ethics. We have another comment from Roger later, which I will be reading out to you as well. Omar Rababa has answered Roger, and he said, fair enough, but is providing ethics to a group and Catholic religious education to Catholic students equality? And then Josan Vella said, the best solution, in my opinion, is to remove religion from mainstream curriculum and to make ethics compulsory to all, but then to offer religious education in the religions which the students of that school belong to as an extracurricular activity. Omar Rababa wrote, my question to you is this. We all might agree that the current system is not just to all students. One has to remember that ethics is also not offered in every school for those thinking that Catholics should have CRE and all the others should be provided with ethics. The principle has to be equality of education and entitlement to all students. We all know that the major obstacle in this is political will. One might come up with different ways forward, such as comparative religious education, ethics for all, religions for all, resource-wise, which is difficult resource-wise. But politicians are not eager to make the system more just and equal due to impact among voters. What can be done about this, in your opinion, to convince politicians and policymakers to put a way forward plan into action? Josan Vella also added, just learning about different religions is sociology and not religious education. And Omar Rababa again said, also, what are your opinions on Catholic-based ceremonies, events along the year, excluding and segregating other students? And Josan wrote, Professor Gellel's idea of students meeting to see what religious values and beliefs are common with other religions. What values are shared is wonderful and can be achieved as part of the extracurricular activities of the school. For sure, more sharing of religious feasts is needed. Godfrey Vella said, I keep hearing this word spiritual. However, nobody seems to care to define exactly what this nebulous term means. In my view, it simply obfuscates matters under discussion with a petty, meaningless term. Roger Terrazona said, Gellel said a lot of things that are inaccurate about the current state of human rights education, democratic education, and most of all, about the teaching of ethics in schools. The teaching of ethics in schools was prescribed by the national curriculum of NCF and where available should be provided to students who do not choose CRE because it offers a secular form of moral education necessary for the moral development of students. I'm not sure why the MHA has members directly involved with the teaching of ethics and was of the most vociferous contributors to ethics education in 2011 and 2012, but Gellel is allowed to make these extraordinary claims unchallenged. Joanna Onion said, I searched and searched for a word for what some non-religious people feel is their spirituality. I ended up with that paragraph. And then Roger Terrazona again wrote, human rights education, for example, is present in social studies, PSCD, and ethics, starting from primary school all the way to MathSec. Those are our comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. So Adrian, would you like to start and maybe unpack some of these questions?